I mean, today a federal judge ruled that Trump's decision to deploy military troops into the streets of Los Angeles was completely illegal. In an absolutely blistering 52-page ruling, the judge wrote that Trump violated the Posse Comitatus Act in what he called a, quote, top-down systemic effort to use military troops to execute various sectors of federal law. He accused the Trump administration of, quote, creating a national police force with the president as its chief. That stinging rebuke comes just days after another federal court ruled that nearly all of Donald Trump's disastrous tariffs are clearly illegal. And just this weekend, another judge blocked the Trump administration from deporting 600 unaccompanied children to Guatemala. And we're going to talk about that later in the show, too. But it's not just judges. Last week, the New York Times reported that the Trump administration has been repeatedly rebuked by grand juries in Washington, D.C., while trying to secure indictments against protesters in the city. Over and over and over again, the Trump administration is losing the legal battles over their unpopular and highly illegal agenda. According to Just Security, of the 389 cases brought against this administration, 125 of them have seen judges block Trump's policies completely, and 10 more have been blocked in part. And there are still another 147 cases still outstanding. A new article out today in The Atlantic explores how the Herculean effort to challenge the Trump administration in court has come together after legal experts began pressing their cases, not just in the court of law, but also in the court of public opinion. And those experts stress the importance of coordinating their efforts among many groups instead of relying on just one organization to fight all of those legal fights. Here's what the piece says, quote, "The plan that emerged was not focused on centralizing a response, but on running a barrage of coordinated efforts. Attorneys general would represent states, advocacy groups would focus on their areas of expertise, and the unions would gather stories from their members and identify plaintiffs who could show harm." One plaintiff quoted in the story recalled how he was approached to join one of the lawsuits, saying, quote, "The conversation was, you're in 1938 Berlin. Which kind of person are you? This is the closest you're going to get to that moment." It is brave plaintiffs like that and the fearless lawyers who represent them who have managed to keep the Trump administration from completely undoing the rule of law in this country, despite all of his efforts to do so. Joining me now is Norm Eisen, Executive Chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund, and Skye Perryman, President and CEO of Democracy Forward. Okay, I think between the two of you, I have no idea, dozens of cases, hundreds. I have no idea how many cases you are currently litigating. Probably hundreds of cases against the current administration. But let me just start with you, Norm. I mean, in the last few hours, and I started the show talking about this, the Republicans on the House Oversight Committee released over 30,000 pages. 97% of it, if not more, but that's according to Democrats in the committee, is not new. So there's tiny, tiny parts that are new. You both are litigating a number of cases regarding the Epstein files. Does this release change anything about your strategy?
No, Jen. It's a cover-up. They're pouring these documents that are already public, that people have, that they don't need, while concealing the most essential documents. So we're both litigating to try to get that through the Freedom of Information Act. We at Democracy Defenders Fund, my wonderful colleagues and I, are focusing on the Trump-Epstein files. I don't want these thousands of pages that don't mention Donald Trump. Let's see what's in these Epstein files about Donald Trump and the illegitimate transfer of Ghislaine Maxwell. Why did this woman involved in these terrible crimes against underage women get transferred from a serious prison to a country club? We want the documents and the answers on that.
And I think a lot of people want all of those documents. And Skye, you and I have talked about how you have been pursuing litigation on internal communications, right, which is another part of this that's very much a part of what is happening within the Trump administration. I'm assuming that doesn't change. Anything new on that front?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're focused on the cover-up. We know that there's a reason that the president, went to lengths to create a bunch of conspiracy theories, made a ton of allegations against members of the Biden administration, and now, won't release anything publicly. And so we are focused on those communications. We have a judge that's already set a schedule in the case. We are pushing it aggressively, and we expect to know more in the coming weeks.
I read this. I quoted from this article in The Atlantic today, which are both quoted in, which I thought was really interesting because it talks about the strategy that all of legal eagles like you, legal eagles who work for you, and other legal eagles out there have been deploying. One of the things, a lot of things struck me. One of the things that struck me, Norm, you and I worked together when you were the ethics counsel in the White House. And the lesson I always learned is don't talk about the legal cases. The lawyers aren't going to talk about the legal cases. There's really not a public strategy to most of the legal cases. That's very different now, right?
Jen, the thing that is necessary now is Donald Trump is flooding the zone with his autocratic attacks on the rule of law. He's trying to overwhelm the system. And so we need to meet that with rule of law shock and awe. And as I told the wonderful Michael Schur, who did this piece and quoted Sky and talked about the state attorneys general, the ACLU, Public Citizen, labor, community groups, so many who are doing this. They're meeting Flood the Zone with rule of law shock and awe. Part of that is court of law. Part of it is court of public opinion. So you have to talk about it. In fact, Sky and I co-chaired with the conservative group Principles First back last summer, a public meeting, 300 experts from all over the country to say, get ready, this is coming, and we're going to have to litigate and talk.
Yeah, it's so different now because it's not, you can't just be filing away loss. And the other thing, let me ask you, Sky, is that it seems like it's not just, well, you guys are doing so much litigation, you're doing tons, but it's not just one group. You are figuring out who the right plaintiffs are and you're coordinating. It's not under one umbrella. And why is that exactly? Why is that strategy so important?
Absolutely. I mean, these are the American people's cases. And that's why it's important that we talk about them, that we don't just go file them quietly and hide under a bushel, right? This is about the American people. And there are communities across this country, whether it's the public schools that we represent that were featured in the Atlantic article, or labor groups or immigration groups, small businesses we are representing, they're all affected in different ways. What they have in common is that Donald Trump and his administration and congressional Republicans have not made their lives better or easier, but we really see all these groups coming together. And so what we're seeking to do is to make sure that they can access the courts. When big law firms are pulling back, when there's a lot of powerful institutions that are pulling back, the people are stepping forward. And that's what we see in our cases. And it's why we're talking about it.
There have been a lot of successes. I just outlined some of the numbers there with lower courts. The Supreme Court has not been as friendly, I should say. I don't know if friendly is the right word, has not been as supportive of some of these efforts to hold back on the rule of law, however you want to define it. My point is this.
How about enabling Donald Trump's autocracy?
They have enabled it. They have enabled it. A lot of these cases have to go to the Supreme Court. So what do?
Well, the Supreme Court, as busy as they've been, and I think as wrong as they've been, don't take my word for it, conservative jurists, we often represent conservatives in the legal briefs we file. Judge Michael Luttig, he says the Supreme Court is perverting the rule of law. But, Jen, two things. One, they only touch about 10% of the cases. So in those other 90% of the cases at Democracy Defenders Fund, we won a big victory on Donald Trump's elections EO. Supreme Court hasn't touched that. We protected the TSA union. That's not at the Supreme Court. Voice of America, not at the Supreme Court. The AmeriCorps case, we got all those AmeriCorps kids. That's a case I do with Sky and her crew. We got them rehired. And then when the Supreme Court does interfere, like they did on birthright citizenship, we were in court 2 hours later. They said you need to have a class action. We filed a class action 2 hours later. We got that class action certified. We got an injunction against not recognizing the citizenship of some babies. So that's how you do it.
So Norm's saying kind of don't freak out everyone. Everything is not going to the Supreme Court. But what do you say?
Well, I'll also say something we want the American people to understand is this administration is backing off. They're actually backing off in some ways that the president doesn't want you to know about, that Pam Bondi doesn't want you to know about. about. We litigated and won before many courts, the Department of Education, keeping it from being decimated. And then the Supreme Court, without explanation, put a hold on that win. It didn't say what the president did was lawful, by the way. No court has really said that on many of these things. But it put a stay on our injunction. So we filed another suit to unlock over $6 billion of public school funds for this school year for communities across the country. And before we even had to take that case up through the system, there was so much public pressure from people across the country and from this litigation that the administration released the funds. And so if there's one strategy here, it's that keeping your head down is not going to do the American people any good. Standing up and being clear that we will take these cases everywhere. We will go to the Supreme Court. We've launched a first-in-class at Democracy Forward, a first-in-class appellate project if we need to go to the Supreme Court. But we're going to be there in communities across the country with the people, and we are going to force this administration to back down.
People need a little shot of hope in their veins. You two are filing hundreds of cases. You're holding people to account. Norm Eisen, Skye Perryman, thank you so much for being here with me tonight.